Hello, this is Martin Brennand, Product Manager of Imagineer Systems, and welcome to this tutorial on rotoscoping with HitFilm Express and Mocha. HitFilm Express is FX Home's free version of the software that allows you to purchase additional features where required, and Mocha is one of those features. So I'm going to take you through an example of rotoing a shot in Mocha, and then using the shape data to color correct inside HitFilm Express. And of course, everything I show you today can also be done in HitFilm Pro. So let's get started. Okay, so here we are inside HitFilm 3 Express, and I'm going to load up a piece of footage. So I'll load up this composition. So we've got this shot here of a lady putting on some makeup, and we want to go ahead and change the color of her nightgown. So you can see here that we're going to have a couple of areas that we're going to need to correct. One is the front of her gown, and another is the reflection on the back of her gown. And then we're also going to have to deal, if I scrub through the timeline, we're going to have to deal with the fact that her body covers some of the reflection in the background and mask that out as well. So we can achieve this by tracking everything inside Mocha. Now Mocha is only available if you grab the add-on for HitFilm 3 Express or if you have HitFilm 3 Pro, but this will add either a solve with Mocha HitFilm option up here, or we can just go ahead and right click and choose open with Mocha HitFilm. And that's what I'm going to do here. Okay, so this loads up Mocha HitFilm in the background and loads in the footage from the layer we selected inside HitFilm 3 Express. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK, and this brings in the footage into Mocha. So whenever you're doing Roto, it's first good to just quickly scrub through the shot and see what you're dealing with. So as I mentioned before, we've got this issue of, for the colouring of her nightgown in the background, it's clear here what we need to track, but then it gets covered by her shoulder in the foreground. We also want to colour correct the small triangles on the front of her nightgown, but these disappear reasonably quickly and we don't have a lot of detail to work with, so we're going to have to deal with that as well. So since that one is reasonably straightforward, we're going to start with these. I'm going to sort of zoom out a little bit so we can see the entire area around we need to track. And I'm going to start by drawing a very, very large shape on the front of her chest. And the reason I'm doing this is because of that exact problem of these little points disappear really quickly. So what I'm doing is grabbing the whole plane of her chest area, and this is going to be used to drive the roto for the color correction later. So this can be a really rough shape, and then we just link the roto information back to this track. So I'm going to come down here to my track settings, and I'm going to set up perspective because her chest moves in a subtle perspective way. I'm also going to track the minimum percentage of pixels used to about 90, just to make sure that I get a lot of useful information. So the higher this value is, the more accurate your track is, and the lower this value is, the faster your track is. But generally, you want to go for accuracy over speed. You can also see that I'm avoiding her hand here so it doesn't throw off the track. We could go ahead and draw a mask around her hand, and then that would occlude out of this tracking mask, but here we can just simply avoid it by drawing the spline next to it. Okay, so now our shape is drawn and we've got our parameters set. Let's go ahead and track forwards. So this is going to track the perspective of her chest in the entire area we've drawn here, and you can see the subtle distortion that's happening as she moves her shoulders around and her chest changes. So this is going to be really, really useful for driving those small points of color on the fabric without having to track just those areas. So if we scrub the timeline back now, we can see how that shape is moving. So once we've done this rough track, we can now just turn it off. We don't need to see it anymore because we're only going to be using this shape as the driving track. And in fact, if we turn on the surface here, we can see how that track is moving in perspective. You can see that as her shoulder moves, how that little bit of perspective pops out there, and this is going to really help distort the fabric for these areas when we draw the roto. So I'm going to turn off the grid and the surface, and I'm going to turn off the layer, but more importantly I'm going to rename the layer chest track so that we've got that as our point for linking up later. So now we can go ahead and do the roto for the other parts. So let's just zoom in a little bit here so we can see really well these areas that we need to track. And I'm going to come in here and draw a simple shape using that X-spline tool. And we're really getting tight into those corners there. And this is a much more refined process, not like the rough track shape we did before, we're really going to make sure that this is a nice clean bit of roto. So I'm going to right click my tangents here on the X-spline and just smooth them out a little bit by just dragging there. And that just gives it a nice softer shape and makes it look a little bit more subtle. So once we've got our shape here, what we can do now is link this roto shape back to the track we've just done. So we'll come over here to where it says link to track and choose the chest track that we've just done. So if I go ahead and scrub the timeline now, you'll see that that rotor now falls off screen and continues to follow down even though we don't have any information to work with there, because it's using that tracking information to drive the whole roto shape. What we do need to do, however, is adjust it just slightly, because you can see as I start to drag through here, the roto is just falling into the trim here. So we need to just tweak the roto slightly to make sure that it looks okay. So I'm going to scrub through until I see it start to drift a little bit, just there. And I'm going to add another keyframe to say this bit error is fine. And then I'm going to keep dragging through until I see the full motion falling off there. And we'll just pull that in a little bit to make sure it looks correct. So let's just drag back now. And that's looking a lot better. If at any point you're doing fine roto and you want to check how this is looking, what you can do is come up to your mats, which is this button here, and turn them on. And you can also then turn off this little thing called the paint bucket. This little paint bucket colorizes the layer normally, so you can see a filled mat. But if you turn it off, it actually cuts it out, and you can see if there's any edge falling into your spline. So if I scrub through the timeline here, we can see now that there's no trim falling inside my cutout, and it's just an easy way to visualize. You can also go one step further and turn off the layers and just see the matte shape, and you can see there's a little bit of an edge of that trim coming in. So we can go ahead and tweak it just a little bit. I'm going to go back to my keyframe here and move it in just a little bit to make sure that we're not covering the trim area and only the fabric area. If we want to see the reverse of that, we can come over here to our blend mode and click invert, and then we can see a cutout of the matte shape we've made in this view. And again, we can turn off the spline up here to make sure that that matte is looking correct. So I'm happy with that now, so I'm going to go and turn back on my colorize, and I'm going to go back to the non-inverted version of the spline. And we'll just quickly scrub through, and we're pretty happy with the way that roto is looking. So I'm going to go ahead and now do it for this side. So over here we're going to have a little bit more distortion. If I drag through the timeline, we can see that her arm is actually distorting some of the fabric here. So I'm going to draw a basic shape to begin with, and then I'm going to have to animate it a little bit over here. So let's go ahead and draw our X-spline like we did last time, all the way around, and we'll get into the little crevice between her arm and her chest here. Just like that. And again, we'll smooth it out just a little bit, and I'll tighten that one up just to make that a nice sharp corner over there. And once again, we're going to do the same thing as last time. We're going to come in here and link it to the chest track, and let's just scrub through the timeline and see how that's looking. And in fact, you can see that the distortion of the track is actually helping warp that spline quite well. But we've got a little bit of work to do over here. So let's go ahead and fix that now. Before I continue, I'm going to actually name my layers. So I'm going to name the previous layer front left, because that's her left side, and front right. So we've got those labeled, and so they'll be easier to find later when we bring them back into HitFilm. So now let's quickly just scrub through and find where we need to start distorting. So around here, we're still good. So I'm going to again add a keyframe for that spline area here so that we know that this bit is locked off nicely and working correctly. So let's move forward, and we can see here that we've only got a little bit of work to do here. We've just got to push these few spline points out here to change that fabric. So let's move across to about here, and I'm going to move this spline point over, and the same with this one, and we'll bring that out just to maintain the approximate shape. So let's just scrub back and see how that's looking, and that's distorting really, really nicely, and there's probably not much else we need to do there. So let's go and have a look now at the back. I'm going to zoom back out by using the asterisk key, and now we can address what's going on with the fabric for the back. So let's just quickly scrub through the timeline and look at what we're dealing with. So this frame right at the end is where we can see her back the largest, so that's probably where we'll draw the shape. Ohowever, the problem is we've got this shoulder coming in and blocking half of her back by the start of the shot. So first of all, I'm going to draw an occlusion mask to block this shoulder out from affecting my tracking data back here. So let's move to the beginning of the shot, and then we can draw a basic mask. So let's just zoom out a little bit further so we can see what we're doing, and I'm going to select my X-Spline tool and draw a rough mask around her arm. Now I'm not being super careful here, I only really care about the bit that is covering the fabric that we want to color correct. So I'm going to smooth that out a little bit, and we're going to keep that rough. You can see that I've gone outside the edge of her shoulder because I want to get a little bit of how the shoulder is moving compared to the background. And this is useful for tracking most planar objects. If you do a little bit outside the object you're tracking, as long as there isn't a high contrast that's going to throw off your track, it actually helps Mocha to see how the plane is moving compared to the background. And this time I don't actually care about perspective. Her shoulder isn't moving that much compared to her chest, so I'm going to leave it just as sheer and get a little bit of the distortion. And I'm going to leave it as the default of 50 as well. This time I'm not caring too much about the accuracy because I've got a nice big chunk of data here. So let's start tracking that forwards. So that's going to just go through and track her shoulder and grab all the little subtle motion that's going on with the motion in that arm there. And once that's finished, we can go ahead and then use this as our occlusion mask. So let's just scrub that back through the timeline and see how that's looking. And I'm pretty happy with that, but once again, I'm just going to turn off that colorize and see to make sure that it's covering her arm all the way through, and it looks like it is. So let's turn back on that bucket. And now we can use this as our mask. So I'm just going to call this one arm mask so that we know what it is. And now we're going to go and look at her back here. So let's come to the end of the timeline where we can see the most of her back, and let's draw another shape. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a nice accurate roto mask around the fabric of her back here, and we'll get all of that detail like so. And again, we're going to smooth that out. Maybe not smooth this one out as much. I'll push that out like so. And we'll just zoom in here so we can see what we're doing to make sure that we're getting it all. So that's the bath tile back there, so we don't want to get that. And we want to grab that up there. And we'll just pull that out a little bit further there. So I'm going to, again, turn off my colorize button and make sure that that's all subtly sitting in the right spot before we start tracking. Now, you'll notice that this layer is on top of this stack in the layer controls over here. Mocha works on a front to back system, so everything that's at the front of the stack on top is closest to the camera, and everything at the bottom of the stack is furthest away. So I actually want to change this back track to be underneath my arm mask. So I'm going to push that underneath my arm mask to make sure that it tracks correctly. Because when this back moves through and underneath the shoulder, we want it to actually occlude. So I'm going to go and turn back on my colorize now, but this time I'm going to select and hold the layer mats button and choose selected track mats. And you'll see why this is important in a minute. So I'm going to come down here to perspective and turn that on because our back moves a little bit in perspective. I'm going to set this to minimum percentage of pixels of 90. We could put it to 100, but 90 will probably do. And then we can start tracking backwards. So let's go track. Now I've done a mistake here. I'm going to drag back. I've actually still got my arm mask cog on, and I want to turn that off. So let's just turn that off. These cogs drive what tracks in the layer controls, and I've already tracked the arm mask, so I don't want to do it again. So I'm going to select my backtrack now that I've turned that cog off, and start tracking backwards. So as we track this, you can start to see that shoulder mask is now eating away the mask of my back. And this just means it's going to ignore what this mask area is doing, so it doesn't throw off the track. You'll notice, however, that there is a little bit of weird distortion going on, and this is because we've run out of useful information over here where we've got a limited amount of mask left. So what we can do is actually go all the way back to the beginning of our track and just zoom out a little bit. And I'm going to actually drag my layer up just for this first frame, and we'll worry about it later. We'll avoid her hair a little bit, and I'm going to use this whole area here to help track the perspective. So we'll go back and track again. And this time it's going to be using not just the fabric, but also her skin here, the trim, and everything in this texture area to drive the perspective warp a little bit better. And this time you can see that it's actually warping a lot nicer than it did before. So now that I've used a bigger tracking area, all I need to do is go back to my original keyframe and drag that spline back down to where it was, like so. And I'm just going to add another little point here just to capture that area there, because I'm not happy with that curve, like so. And now the tracking data is going to drive the spline where we originally drew it. So we've got to still fix up this little area here, so let's just pull that up and make sure it's fitting into the right spot. So I've just gone through and added a few more subtle modification points here, here, and here, just to make that smooth out nicely. And so we're happy with that background area. So the last thing that we need to do is now just refine this roto shape for the shoulder so that it's nice and clean against the edge, and we can use it as a mask inside HitFilm. So let's go ahead and refine this. Now I don't care too much about the top part of his shoulder here, that was just to help out the track. All I really care about what is covering this part of the fabric. So I'm going to start from about here where the issue begins, and we're going to start covering from here. So I'm going to first of all turn off my mat and see where that's sitting, and I'm pretty happy with where that is at the beginning. And we'll keep dragging through and we can just start to see some problems there. So let's just stop about here and we'll create a new keyframe for that area, and we'll keep dragging backwards until we see a little bit of a gap here. We can see that just there. So let's move that in a little bit and make sure that's still looking okay. Yep. And keep dragging through, and we'll pull in this side here so that it covers that area correctly. And we'll just keep on tweaking until it looks okay. Okay, so now that we've tweaked that arm mask and we've got our other mask, let's just have a look at all of them in sequence. So I'm going to come back to my matte button, select it and choose all mattes. And then we can just see how all of those mattes are looking for our final composite. So our fabric ones on the front are looking okay, the back one is looking okay, and our mask is looking okay as well. So we can now go ahead and export all these in one go and then use them to composite in the color correction. So to do this, all we do is come down to Export Shape Data, and in here we choose all visible layers, not just selected layer, otherwise we'll only get the one that's currently selected. And when we choose all visible layers, we want to make sure that the things that we don't want are turned off. So the chest track, for example, that we did to drive the front parts of the masks has been switched off in the visibility. So only these 4 ones with the eyeballs turned on will export with this layer. So I'm going to go ahead and click Save, and I'm going to overwrite the nightgown file that I've already got here and click Save. Yes, we'll overwrite that. And now we can go back to HitFilm and import the composite shot. Okay, so back over in HitFilm, we just need to now import our composite shot. So I'm going to right click my media area and choose Import Composite Shot from the right click menu. And under here we've got our nightgown option, so we'll double click that. And this brings in our various parts of our masks that we rotoed out inside Mocha. So we can now use this file in a number of ways. We can either drag this composition into our original composite shot that we were working with, or we can just use the imported composite shot to build up our final composite. And that's what I'm going to do here. I'm just going to grab my original source material and drag it to the bottom of my layer stack. And now all of my composited mask layers are on top of that source. Now I'm going to move a couple of things around. I still want my arm mask to be in front of my backtrack, so this composite stays the same. But I actually want my front parts of the nightgown in front of everything else, because that's technically what they are. Because I don't want the shoulder mask that we made, which is actually quite large, to cover up any of the fabric down here. So now that we've got our layout set out, let's actually go ahead and apply some effects. So what I'm going to do is first of all select my front left layer and come up to the Effects panel and choose Color Correction and Hue, Saturation and Lightness. And I'm just going to drag this down to my front left one. And this loads up in my controls over on the left here. So let's just twirl that one down. And I'm going to choose the Master. And I'm going to switch the saturation quite low. And I'm also going to bring the lightness down to make this sort of a dark nightgown rather than a light one. So we'll go about there, about -30. And I'm going to actually also soften the edge a little bit because it's a little bit harsh in here. So I'm going to come into my front left layer, choose my masks, come through splines, shape, and choose the feather strength. And we'll just drag this up a little bit. And about 5 pixels is probably going to do the trick. So let's just choose 5, like so. And that's a nice softer edge now on that effect. So now I can go ahead and copy the same effect over to my front right area and do the same for the spline. So let's just twirl down the masks, go to the spline. We'll set a feather strength of 5 and we'll drag through and see how that looks. So far so good. And finally we want to do it for that back area. So let's go back to the backtrack, paste in the effect to get the same color. And I might actually soften this spline out a little bit further. So let's go to the spline, grab the feather strength, and we'll bring it up to about maybe 10 because it's a little bit more blurry in the background here. So let's just scrub through and see how that looks. So we can see again how that mask on the shoulder is covering the color correction now quite nicely. And we could probably soften out that a little bit as well, but I'm pretty happy with how that looks. So that's how you can use Mocha's tracking and Roto to assist effects and color correction inside HitFilm 3 Express. If you have any questions about tracking and Roto in Mocha in general, you can go to our forums at imagineersystems.com under the support menu, or you can email us at support@imagineersystems.com, or check out our Facebook page at facebook.com/imagineersystems.